When it comes to movie exposure, the Batman villains have had more exposure than any other comic franchise. The problem is that many of the adaptations were not good at all, or true to the comic character that the movie adaptation reflects. I'm going to tell you about 10 villains that will never be seen in movies, from the most likely choice and why, to the least likely and why. Number 10. Mr.Freeze. Ironically, when Mr. Freeze was adapted in Batman and Robin, this was true to the comic version of the character when he was first introduced. A freeze gun toting madman, and that was it. But the Bruce Timm and Paul Dini reimagining of the character in Batman the Animated Series as a tragic villain of circumstances had this version of the character become the comic reader preferred choice. I could see a real adaptation of Mr. Freeze being forced as a villain, not doing so out of thrill or simple anarchy. A key plot of his will be fighting Batman not because he wanted to, but because Batman is getting in the way of him trying to find a cure for his wife. Number 9. Poison Ivy. We did not see Poison Ivy in Batman and Robin. We saw Uma Thurman costume playing as Poison Ivy. Much like Mr. Freeze, the adaptation was completely wrong. I can easily see Poison Ivy as a villain that only gets in the way of Batman because of her ulterior motive to protect the planet. Ivy can either be a major or minor villain in any future adaptation. Number 8. The Riddler. We did not see the Riddler in Batman Forever. We saw Jim Carrey running around in green spandex, giggling and laughing. I think a good key plot of the Riddler in any future movie would be him toying with Batman, trying to see who's a better mastermind with clues and solving riddles similar to the representation in the Arkham Asylum games. A possible movie plot would have him finding out Batman's identity and threatening to expose him if he didn't play clue games with the Riddler to see who was the greatest mastermind in Gotham. Eventually, a good plot twist I think would have Edward Nygma becoming tired of the Riddler persona and just stops being a villain. Maybe he beats Batman in some circumstances or gets away with too many crimes and eventually finds it all pointless. Something like Batman the Animated Series. Number 7. Harley Quinn. The reason why Harley is almost halfway into the list is because you don't have Harley Quinn without the Joker, who was already adapted perfectly. And because of this fact, we won't see another adaptation of the Joker for a very long time. Number 6. Clayface. Something fresh and new, Clayface has real talent to be seen in movies. But there are some hurdles if this character is to be adapted. The villains previously on the list rank a better chance of being adapted, but I think the whole tragic story put in the animated series episode was brilliant. Actor Matt Hagen becomes addicted to a new type of experimental cosmetic cream to fix his body after being in an accident. Forced to do blacklist jobs by Roland Daggett and becomes a monster by Daggett when Hagen essentially becomes a drug addict. He later becomes a villain and takes revenge on Roland Daggett, but Batman tries to stop him. Eventually, Hagen gets away in similar circumstances seen in the classic episode Feet of Clay. Number 5. ManBat. A real easy version to put this character into a movie would have Dr. Kirk Langstrom being under the control of another villain. Almost like raw muscle for a hidden agenda. But I think if this character was to be the main villain of a movie, a subplot would be ManBat acting semi-consciously and trying to get back to his wife Francine. She could be a scientist trying to cure him and teams up with Batman to find that cure. Number 4. The Mad Hatter. Ranking just ahead of ManBat, Jervis Tetch is a rather hard villain to put into a movie, but at the same time provides something fresh and new for a movie audience. The idea of him being a disgruntled person seeking revenge also provides a decent movie idea. Originally working for Wayne Tech as the animated series origin also adds a bit of plot depth. Number 3. Killer Croc. With Killer Croc, it's harder to put the character into a movie because you already have Brute Force, which is the ManBat, and his backstory seems to be more appealing and more interesting to adapt than Croc. If he was to be put into a movie, he might be the hired muscle of some other more important villain. Number 2. Hugo Strange. Even though Professor Hugo Strange is one of Batman's oldest villains, appearing before the Joker and Catwoman, and in the comics is one of the first to deduce Bruce Wayne's secret identity, a threat like this should have been put into the movies already, but I would imagine it would be rather hard to do so. But if any adaptation of Strange was to happen, I can imagine him being the grand master behind some conspiracy in Gotham City that poses a danger to both Bruce Wayne and Batman. Number 1. Owlman, the evil version of Batman from another dimension. Owlman is the one villain we will never see adapted, most likely because it's one thing to have all the villains before him, but to bring in Owlman would have to explain an alternate universe. I personally like the idea of Batman fighting against an evil version of himself, but there are too much problems to bring this villain into a movie adaptation, not unless the character's backstory is completely redone. It's a shame as to why some or most of these villains may never be seen in a movie adaptation. As to why, I won't bother to say it. Everyone has their own theories, but I will say this. Do you agree with this list? If you was to come up with some ideas for new Batman movies, which villains from this list would you adapt? How and why?